America, we stand for freedom. Though freedom is never really free, we yearn and strive for government protecting our liberty.
Good evening, and welcome to Your Right to Know by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. My name is Mary Lotze, and I will be your host for this evening's show. Joining me tonight on our panel is a panel of one, a good friend, an old friend, and also a friend who's in a new position. I'd like to introduce John Strang, Dr. John Strang. And Dr. Strang is now our new chair of the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. So thank you very much for joining me in your new position as chairman and then also as an old friend. Welcome.
My pleasure.
John, you and I have talked so often about different things on politics and ethics and this philosophy of politics and all. So that's what I thought we would talk about tonight as a case for republicanism, and really starting out by the most recent Supreme Court decisions. They came out with two decisions recently, the John Roberts Supreme Court, and one was on Obamacare, and it said that Obamacare was going to be the law of the land for health care, and then the other was around gay marriage, and that every state would now recognize gay marriage. So I'd like to kind of talk about those issues from a larger perspective. As we grew up, we learned that there are three branches of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, and yet all three are equal. But yet, as it almost seems to some, we have a little bit of a collaboration going on where maybe there's two against one, and right now I'm saying the executive and the judicial are kind of pairing up and making some of these maybe a little difficult decisions that almost don't seem like they were coming from the Supreme Court in an unbiased way. Could you talk about that, and specifically around the two decisions of Obamacare and the gay marriage?
Sure. Well, with respect to the two decisions, the Affordable Care Act and the Obergefell decision, I guess is the technical name of it.
And the
Obergefell.
And that's the gay.
That's right.
Marriage.
That was the gay marriage question, so-called marriage. Of these two, I think they're both atrocious, but in a sense, the worst is the gay marriage decision, in the sense that the Affordable Care Act, a misnomer since it's not affordable, and there will be some question about the degree of care that's actually provided under it. This is something that can be reversed or at least altered. We've witnessed even though the Republicans control both houses of Congress, they have not exactly been valiant in opposing this so far. But it's conceivable in 2016 with the election of a Republican president that a Republican-dominated Congress could alter the Affordable Care Act and remove some of its more oppressive aspects. With respect to the gay marriage decision, this I think is much more contemptible. It's a really deplorable decision. In fact, when I heard it, the immediate thing I thought of was we have a parallel here to the Dred Scott decision. And surely your viewers know this, but if not, I'll give a brief recapitulation of that. In 1857, the Supreme Court, headed by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, made a ruling on an individual named Dred Scott, a former slave who had been brought into actually two free territories. And according to the constitutions of those free states, he was automatically liberated from his slavery because of that sojourn. This eventually came to the Supreme Court, and the Taney court decided that not only was he not freed, but he, in general, slaves, their rights as human beings were not protected by the Constitution. So it was a decision, was a slap in the face, certainly to the abolitionists, but to most people in the Union and to some people in the South. The reason why I draw this parallel is because the Dred Scott decision was perceived at the time as indeed a challenge to all of those who had been trying to preserve the Union through compromise for the past 3 decades. Abraham Lincoln himself had a resurgence of interest in running for political office because of the Dred Scott decision, and 4 years later, of course, he became the president. Now, my view is that the Obergefell decision is parallel to that. We haven't seen an enormous outcry in the populace yet, but this is probably because the full consequences of the so-called Gay Marriage Act have not played out yet. There will be consequences for all aspects of civil society as we know it. That is to say, religion
Well, that's the
belief
one
will be affected.
that's the one that really comes to mind immediately.
That's right. Religion will be affected. Certainly, you can imagine future situations in which a pastor or some other religious official refuses to marry two people of the same sex, and this is seen as an affront to the Obergefell decision and the law, but also to businesses in general, to education. This will also be an area where there can be a side effect of this. And indeed, ironically maybe, the Obergefell decision itself, that's intended to ensure the right of people of the same sex to marry, may itself see a surgence of people who want to marry multiple partners, for example, or even non-human partners. I mean, it's really...
the ramifications.
That's right,
could
exactly.
Go on and on.
It's something that I think it may take a while, maybe it'll not take quite as long as we assume, but there will be consequences. And it's interesting that in the wake of the Supreme Court decisions, which only took place, a few weeks ago now, polls, 3 separate polls have shown an overwhelming antipathy toward the decisions on the part of the American people. So it's not as if the decision has been accepted by the populace, even though it's been granted. I alluded to the Dred Scott decision here because we seem to assume that if a decision is rendered by the Supreme Court, that's it. Well, that's not always it. It wasn't it in Dred Scott. And we shouldn't lapse into the view that, well, we can't do anything now. I think changes can still be made. Now, with respect to the other aspect of your question there about whether there is something, you didn't use the word collusion, but something close to that, between the judiciary, in this case the highest level of it, and the executive, I don't think that's the case, but certainly we know that the decisions on the part of, Chief Justice Roberts in preserving Obamacare, both in the earlier decision he made back in 2010, I think it was, and in this most recent decision, show that there's a willingness on the part of some justices to make decisions based upon what is considered a feeling or a sentiment that the popular will desires such and such.
Well, I was thinking that it's almost, in some ways also, it's like we have to give President Obama a legacy. I mean, if we look at this current president, and we look at what he has done worldwide, nationwide, at whatever matrix we want to look at it, we realize that he has not been a successful president, a particularly successful president. And going down in through history, as presidents are always judged in history, really versus right in the immediacy, that what he's doing is trying to give him a legacy through some of the support of some of these decisions. Right.
It certainly comes across that way. It's difficult to get into the heads of any of these justices, but it's on the reading of the Obamacare law on its face, as we're well aware, literally the justices decided against what the law literally said. Right. And right there, that alone is kind of bizarre, you know. But as I said, in the case of Obamacare, I think it can be upended. If not completely eliminated, then essentially altered in a way that can make it more viable as a lawful institution.
I mean, right away you mentioned religion, but also small businesses. There have been several cases now that have been on the news where people are being fined large amounts of personal of salary or income or of their own private wealth for failure to comply with certain things. Right. And one of those, I think it is an Oregon case where a Christian family, for whatever reason, has chosen not to make a wedding cake for a gay couple. Right. And because of that decision, they're going to be fined, they'll probably ultimately lose their business. As a Republican, I kind of think that should be part of the free market decision. If you pick and choose who you want to make a cake for, it seems to me that people will stop frequenting your bakery.
I agree.
Soon.
And these polls that I referenced also come out the same way. Of course, they have the same sentiment. Unfortunately, much of the discussion in the public square tends to be determined by people who don't come necessarily from that persuasion.
Well, and I think this gets into something that you and I, again, have talked about routinely, and that's facts versus emotions.
Right.
And some of the decisions, and I dare say the decisions maybe even on the Supreme Court, are now being made from an emotional side versus from a factual side.
Right. What Mary is referring to here, what you're referring to, is based, I think, on a reference I made in a little paper that I think you distributed.
Yes, very scholarly paper that was well thought out.
My point is that I came upon a reference in a blog, and I can't remember where this was, but some blog I read, where a liberal said to a conservative, this is the difference between us. You have the facts, but we have the emotions. And it seemed to me that's a very good assessment of differences between. We're not talking about content, we're talking about approaches here. What the liberal was saying was essentially that the facts are irrelevant. What counts is that you can work on the emotions, the feelings of people. And the left is very effective at this. I mean, if we were to look at how America has gone politically and socially in our lifetimes, we would have to admit that it's been driven by feelings. Much of what's been happening has been driven by feelings. Now, since I come from a philosophical background, I'll try to make this brief. I wanted to give a sense of what I mean by reasoning versus emoting versus the role of emotion here. Ever since Greek antiquity, when eventually Aristotle worked out the terms of logic, a person who studies logic or critical thinking recognizes that there is a certain structure of an argument, a rational argument, such that you begin with facts and your desire is to end up with acceptable truth. But you can only do this if you observe what are called rules of validity. I won't go into what validity is here because it would be too time consuming. But my point is that the structure of argument worked out in Greek antiquity and made canonical in the form of logic, then passed on, became the structure of scientific thinking. And at a political level, rhetoric actually served this purpose, classical rhetoric. What we're witnessing around us today is almost a replacement or a tendency to replace the basis of rational argument with emotion, with appeal to emotion. Now, anyone who's taught logic or critical thinking knows that there are certain what are called informal fallacies of reasoning. This is where false conclusions are achieved by various means, and one common means is the appeal to emotion. For example, suppose I have a student, and this has happened, who comes to me after she's failed 2 exams, and she says, oh, Professor Strang, I have to pass this course or my mother will be so disappointed. Now, that's an appeal to emotion.
Sure.
Now, the student is putting forth the claim that I should pass her. This is the conclusion of her implicit argument. And she's using as a basis for this an appeal to emotion. Her mother will be disappointed. Well, her mother very well may be disappointed, but that's not a reason. That doesn't constitute a reason why I should pass her in the course. If we look around us at many of the so-called reasons given for doing something or not doing something, we have to recognize that much of it is based upon emotion, appeal to emotions and feelings. This is not something that comes out of thin air. It comes out of schools. Most young people go to public high schools, and in public high schools they tend to be taught by people coming from education backgrounds or English backgrounds, sociology backgrounds. It's characteristic of all of the teachers who go into those fields that none of them are required to take logic. So they don't come in with an understanding of argument. They come in with, on the other hand, with a very profound understanding of feelings. So I think that what I'm talking about here is that the culture we are living in is a culture dominated by this mentality.
Well-
and it's very difficult to get away from it.
Well, it is because, I mean, just in citing a couple of things, gay rights, we will find, or gay marriage, we will find that many people will say, I'm so happy gay individuals can
Right.
marry because I know so many of them and they're so happy and they have the equal right to be happy as my husband and I have. An emotional argument.
Right, exactly. And of course that misplaces the whole issue.
We
Marriage is not it's not an emotional thing, although there are emotional aspects to it. Marriage is not the same as romance, romantic affairs. Marriage is an institution of civil society, and as such, it has a long history going back literally millennia.
Mm-hmm.
And as an institution of civil society, and this is true of all Western society and of many non-Western societies, it's always been the union of a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. And when we allow our feelings on the matter, our emotions to intervene and say, well, you can't make them unhappy by denying them the same right, we have to stand back and say, well, let's look at the institution here and the effects this will have on that institution and on collateral institutions in society that we've alluded to, like religion, business, and so on. These will all be affected by this, and it's something we cannot escape.
Well, I think we have some of the same issues, and I'm just going to cite a couple, but abortion issue. You will oftentimes hear of people who say, well, I don't really like abortion, but if my daughter at age 18 were to become pregnant, and President Obama somewhat said some of these same arguments, right. I wouldn't want my daughters to be burdened by having a child out of wedlock, which would then ruin her future. So it's an emotional issue to justify the
right.
abortion. We see it with the immigration. Last year, or when we had those just tens of thousands of mothers and children coming across the southern border in droves and turning themselves right in, the camera was there up close and personal, showing us the saddest faces of,
right.
of children in poverty and mothers in poverty doing the best for their children. And you couldn't help, your heart, you would have to be pulseless not to develop an emotion and an empathy for these people, a sympathy for these people, that then went on to further rationalize and justify why they should be allowed free
right.
access to
right.
the country. So a lot of our decisions and what's being then codified or accepted under law is done because of the emotional.
That's right. And as I've said, this is where the left is extremely effective.
Winning the game.
It is winning the game. It's happening even in Germany. There's a recent incident where Mrs. Merkel, Chancellor Merkel, had a similar confrontation there from a Palestinian refugee child, and it became a major thing. So it's a global problem we face. And I think my own attitude toward this is that we cannot yield to this. We have to stick to the facts, stick to the reasoning, and expose these appeals to emotion for what they are. They're cheap. They're unworthy of us. If you look at our history, you find great leaders in American history did not behave this way. So it's an unfortunate aspect of where we're at right now.
Well, I think one of the other sort of things that then branch out of this little rays of this argument or whatever is that we see, especially when it comes to politics, we see a lot of people who say, I like to vote for the person and not for the party or not for the ideas. So in other words, they see someone like an attractive young black man with a beautiful family, and right away it's like, I'm voting for that person. You see the woman, you want the first woman president, so you say, I'm going to vote for this woman. You see the man with the nicest smile, or the woman with the, I don't know, name, fill in the blanks. And your emotion is to vote for that person. You're not giving any credence at all to what they've done, their record,
right.
their have they had any positive achievements in their life? No, because you're looking strictly at, I just like him or her. Is that part of the argument?
Certainly this is part of, again, the success of the left. I don't mean to say that conservative politicians cannot lapse into this also. This has always been the case with politics. But it is characteristic, and we know, again, this is supported by polls like the Pew Research Center, which is hardly a conservative organization, consistently shows that conservatives tend to know more of the facts, both about individual candidates running for office and about the larger policies involved, the policies that are in play, those that are proposed. These tend to be subjects that conservative people know more about. Liberal people tend to be more inclined to vote for an impression here, and this would be in line with the sway of feelings in making decisions. And we're all familiar with the fact, we can hardly escape it, that young people, but not only young people, are appallingly ill-prepared in understanding our historical basis, our constitutional basis, and the actual records of politicians. Happily, the Republican field this year, which is extremely large, has some very good candidates.
Quality candidates.
Quality candidates,
yes.
who are exactly diametrically opposed to this. The only person I can think on the Democratic side who has, from my perspective, some level of respect would be Jim Webb. And I don't think he's going to go anywhere, you know. But there are many Republicans who do have qualities and intelligence that they can bring to play here. They don't have to appeal to the emotions.
How can you start, you mentioned young people, but even all people, how do you start people to learn the basics of critical thinking and challenge their own thought? I mean, we are a society that follows social media, follows the Kardashians and other, you know, such people. How do you turn around a society that has, so far, people feel very successful, going along just voting on what they like or buying what they like or what they want?
Well, if this question had been posed a generation ago, I could have answered with some confidence, well, we have colleges. And it used to be the case that there was a core requirement in college of a liberal arts degree that a student take a course either in logic or critical thinking. And such courses should teach those bases. I'm not saying that there are not philosophers who are not leftists, certainly there are. But still, the core of a logic course or critical thinking course should get across the difference between rational thinking and rational argument versus simple appeal to emotions and false thinking. Now it's a little bit more tenuous because the core requirements in many higher education institutions have been corrupted or almost eliminated. And this means that students are no longer under the same constraints. This is something I've given thought to. My own desire would be to see such courses implemented outside the college. If it were possible, for example, to get students, high school students, in summer and teach them such courses, it would require some funding and some facilitation that I don't have access to. But I'm not sure that we can assume that they're going to get these things from college anymore.
Right, right. I want to pivot a little bit now to your new role as chairperson of the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. And one of the things that is very clear and evident is that north central Massachusetts, north of Worcester County, and branching off westerly, is really becoming a sort of a little bastion of conservatism. Now, I'm not talking necessarily Republican voters, although conservatives do tend to vote Republican. But when we start looking at some of the patterns over the last couple election cycles, we really realize that many of our cities and towns in north central Mass and going westerly really did deliver the vote for the Republican candidates. Why do you feel it is unique in this area west of Boston that we should start seeing a resurgence of a republicanism or conservatism?
I agree with you. I think, and indeed the statistics support what you're saying. I think that if I remember that correctly, Leominster voted for example, in our own gubernatorial election, they voted for the Baker-Polito team by 57 to 37%. Fitchburg voted not quite as high, but 51 to 41%. And this is borne out also in smaller towns in the area, north central Massachusetts. So there certainly is a body of people here who are sympathetic to what is indeed a Republican, intrinsic Republican message. It may also have an effect, a reason for this may also be that this area has been somewhat ignored. As we know, and as you yourself have mentioned in other contexts, we tend to be excluded from the 495 corridors in terms of founding businesses that could help the area. I tend to myself look upon this part of Massachusetts as more akin to what I grew up in. I'm from northeastern Ohio originally, an area that was settled by people from Massachusetts and Connecticut. And there's a lot of parallel for me in this, a lot of small businesses there. The social institutions were still stable.
And social institutions, just to clarify, you're talking about the family?
The family and church and the schools were still functioning then. They were not corrupted by a liberal mindset, as I think they increasingly are today. I don't know exactly if those are exactly the only causes, but whatever the causes are, the fact is that we have something good to work with here. Right. We have something exceptional in a liberal state. We have a core that's not as liberal as the rest of the state.
A little bit rich and fertile from our perspective.
Exactly.
To potentially start working on some of these other issues.
That's exactly right. And everyone who views this program, everyone in this area should feel, as you indeed say at the end of these programs, you should dedicate yourself to your local town committee or your city committee and try to do something, because it's not a hopeless task. You know, if I were a conservative in Boston, as I was at one time, it's much more difficult there. But it's not a hopeless task here to imagine that this part of the state can indeed work some wonders, because we have worked some wonders.
Well, John, that is a hopeful note. And as we leave tonight, I want to thank you for taking on the position and the role as the new chairperson of the Fitchburg Republican City Committee and being on our show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And as we thank you for watching us tonight and sitting in here with the FRCC, we want you to remember that your local city and town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your constitutional rights and conservative values. We encourage you to join us or any other city and town and local committee. Why? Because to us, the GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity for all people, and because we always stand for freedom. Thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might.